Hello guys, my name is Rastility and I am not the best TDS player. I'll admit, there are so many people who are better than me at this game. However, one thing that I will say is that this video will be the best TDS beginner's guide in 2025. This video will show you everything other video will show you and what they won't show you. I see a lot of these videos that only show you how to grind faster, but they always forget one crucial thing: how to actually play the game properly. A lot of players in this game will get very far into the game without even having the smallest understanding of how to play the game correctly, so they can never beat harder modes. This video will focus on showing you how to actually get better at the game while showing you everything else that other videos show you. This video might be a little bit long, so I have some sections time-stamped in case you want to view a specific part. I hope you enjoy. First off, there's one really important thing you should know. There are 6 general tower classes in this game. First off, we have main or late game DPS. DPS stands for damage per second, and the higher the DPS a tower has, the better overall damage they have. So main DPS towers will usually only appear in the late game, because they are usually very expensive. Take Minigunner for example. He is an absolute powerhouse, and is considered a late game DPS. This is because he usually doesn't have very good upgrades in the beginning. However, as you upgrade him, he becomes much better and will outclass the DPS of every other class of tower in your loadout, letting him be considered a late game DPS. It should be noted that main DPS is by far the most important type of tower class that you could ever possibly bring in your loadout, because none of the other tower classes in the game can do enough damage to get you through some of the tough bosses in the later waves of your round. Let's talk about our second tower class here, and that is early game DPS. A tower that falls under the early game DPS class is something like Shotgunner or even normal Scout. These towers are usually low DPS and never hold up well in the late game. However, as a trade-off for this, they're always extremely cheap, letting you use them as the round starts, unlike a tower such as Minigunner who has a $2,000 placement limit. So, they're nearly always worth using, and they're the third most important type of tower class. The second most important type of tower class is the support class. As the name entails, towers who fall under this category will only support. So naturally, these towers aren't focused on doing damage. They're always focused on boosting you or your towers by either giving them damage increases, fire rate increases, cost reductions, or even extra cash. It's worth mentioning every tower that falls under this category, since there aren't very many. Each tower that falls under the support class is Commander, DJ Booth, Medic, Firework Technician, and Farm. You always want to bring at least one of these into your round because they'll help you significantly. Now for the fourth class, we have sub-supports. Sub-supports are usually support towers that don't support your towers directly. However, they do support your towers by doing something to the enemy to make your towers do better against them. A tower that falls into this category is a tower like Freezer, who freezes and slows down enemies, allowing your towers to have extra time to deal damage. They're never must-brings in your loadout, and so that's why I only ever recommend using one of these towers if you have teammates that are already bringing regular support. And for our fifth class, we're getting to the bottom of the barrel here. We have sub-DPS towers. Sub-DPS towers are usually always just main DPS towers. You should never bring more than one main DPS in a lot of scenarios. However, if you're in the specific scenario where you're in a game mode that gives you millions of cash to spend on another expensive main DPS and you have a free slot open, and when you're with teammates, you can bring a sub DPS tower to do extra DPS. And for our sixth and final class, we have mid-game DPS. Mid-game DPS is usually never important because they're basically just like early game DPS and late game DPS combined. However, since they can't be good at both, they're always just usually lackluster towers that don't have really good stats in either departments to balance things out. So because of this, you can always just use both your early game and late game DPS combined to substitute a mid game DPS in almost every scenario. There is nearly no scenario where you need a mid-game DPS, so you'll usually always want to discard these towers. A tower that is precisely like this is a tower like Warden, who doesn't have good early game stats and can't even be placed on wave 1, and yet he's not even good in the late game at all because he's highly expensive and doesn't provide enough DPS for his incredibly small range. Now, an important thing to note as well is that not every tower is just based on their damage output. To determine if a tower is good, you usually have to look at their range, detections, communities, and cost value. Let me explain what detections are. There are 3 special types of enemies in this game: hidden, flying, and lead. Hidden is usually the most prominent one out of these 3 because flying enemies don't appear until fallen mode and lead doesn't appear until hardcore mode. Sometimes there will be a hidden enemy in a round that your tower can't hit. This means you need to use a tower that has hidden detection or upgrade your tower to get hidden detection. You can see what detections your tower has right here. One flaw that TDS has is not ever providing information about detections on the store page. So what I'd recommend doing is going to the TDS wiki on fandom and searching up a tower and looking at their stats to see if they have a certain detection. You can also use this wiki to determine every other stat, such as immunities, range, damage, and cost values. If a tower has small range but very high DPS, you usually don't want to use that tower, and you want to use a tower that has a higher range. It doesn't matter if your tower has high DPS when the enemies fall out of range of your tower before they can do any good damage. This is also the same case for immunities and cost value. There's no point in having a tower that has high DPS if it costs too much to even get that DPS in the long run. And it also doesn't matter if it has high DPS if your tower is constantly getting stunned. So for this exact purpose, the community usually recommends bringing a tower like Ranger, who has only good DPS, not insane DPS. However, as a trade for this, he has enough range to hit every enemy on the map, while also being decently cheap and completely stun immune. His only downside is that he cannot detect hidden enemies, but it's not like hidden enemies have much health anyways, so you can always just use an early game tower to counter these types of enemies. Before we get into part 2 of this video, let's discuss a loadout. So if you're looking to play solo, which I assume you are, you always want to bring at the minimum 2 supports. The first one usually being always farm, and the second one being a tower of your choice. Then you want to always bring at least 1 early game DPS and 1 late game DPS. You can use whatever you want if you have another tower slot. I just recommend you to avoid using a second early game tower, because only 1 is ever enough. Okay, so this last section focuses on the best way to play the game. First off, you should always bring farm for every mode other than Polluted Wastelands 2. However, if you're watching this video, you probably aren't at the point of playing Polluted Wastelands 2 yet. This is because you absolutely need farm in a lot of scenarios to help you pay for both your early game and your late game towers. Farm is very helpful, but it's not as simple of a tower as you think it is. You might think there's no right or wrong way of using it, but that's absolutely not true. First off, don't try to place all of them at once. You will always want to upgrade your farms to a certain level before placing another one to make the absolute most amount of money, and on some game modes, you don't want to max it out at all. So what you want to do is always try to get your farms to level 2 before upgrading them any further. Then get them all to level 3. Now, when you get them all to level 3, you want to avoid upgrading them to level 4. You can do this by upgrading each of your farms to level 5 one by one. This is generally the best way to get the most money. However, if you're playing modes like easy mode that just have less cash, you don't want to upgrade them past level 3 because you just don't get enough time to get your money back from farm. Now we'll get into the best ways to use your early game DPS. First off, you want to avoid upgrading your towers too much because you want to balance your early game economy and your early game defense. However, you also don't want to upgrade it too little because then you might leak. It's a really tough balancing act and you're not going to master it immediately. This is why I think you should get Cowboy as soon as you can, as he helps a lot for early game grinding, providing cash while also dealing good early game damage. However, I'm just gonna assume you don't have Cowboy. So whatever you do, don't save up for a huge upgrade too early on, as it can devastate your economy in the late game. However, don't procrastinate by not upgrading your towers at all. This is really one of those tricks that you just gotta learn by yourself, and I can't teach you how to master it in this video. You'll just learn it over time. For late game DPS, you're going to always want to place it in range of supports, as they can miss out on a huge chunk of extra DPS if you don't. This extra DPS really means a lot in the long run and can determine whether you win or lose. Also, just don't be afraid to sell towers you used in the early game for extra cash or extra placement space. Those towers aren't going to help much in the long run anyway, and it's better to have more late game towers to do more DPS against the boss. And of course, try not to place it in a wasteful spot. So try avoid placing it right next to void spots where there isn't any track. When you load into the lobby, you're also going to see skill trees on the left of your screen. Don't get these. These are entirely meant for players in the late game, and you aren't going to notice a significant difference unless you have a lot of cash, because unlocking these skill trees takes a lot, and I mean a lot of cash. Try to avoid purchasing skill tree upgrades and cosmetics, such as emotes in tags. It's also important to note that you shouldn't bite off more than you can chew, otherwise you'll get extremely demotivated. Modes like Fallen are really hard for newer players, and even if you're high enough level, you likely won't be able to beat it without getting carries from higher levels. I'd recommend going for easy mode for a long time, as that is easily cleared by any level of player very quickly, and it gives decent cash if you're farming solo. I wouldn't recommend casual mode farming, as only 150 cash extra is such a mediocre increase in money that it's just not worth going for. If you get to a point where you have really good towers, intermediate farming is definitely good, as it can also be cleared very quickly. So avoid casual mode and try to go for easy and then intermediate when you can. Some extra tips when playing with teammates is to always place your towers as close as possible. It's okay if it's not perfect, just do not spread them out, as it can waste valuable spots for towers and it is overall inconsiderate for your team. You also should just avoid bringing more towers that require you to take up a lot of space, or towers that just don't work well with the team-wide placement cap. Try to cooperate with your teammates, and if someone tells you to sell a scout for their engineer, do it. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to like it. I only post TDS content on this channel, and if you want more tips on how to use towers, make sure to subscribe. Do you guys have any comments, questions, or concerns? Leave them in the comment section. This is naturally a big video, so if I made any mistakes in the final cut, I'll be sure to correct them in the pinned comment. Make sure to call out if you see anything that's wrong. My name is Rastility, and I hope to see you in the next video. See ya!